The Thief Who Stole Nothing. There was a woman in Prague who had been a thief for 23 years and had never stolen anything worth keeping. Her name, or the name she'd been using for the past decade, was Katya Novák. 41 years old, fluent in 6 languages, holder of 4 passports in different names, possessor of skills that ranged from lockpicking to social engineering to the kind of confidence that could convince museum security guards that she absolutely belonged in spaces she absolutely did not. She was very, very good at what she did, which made it all the more bitter that she was sitting in a cafe in Malastrana at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday, drinking expensive coffee she couldn't really afford anymore, and admitting to herself that she'd completely fucked up her life. The 7 of Swords reversed had come for her, and unlike the upright version, which was about cunning, strategy, getting away with things, the reversed card was about plans that fail, strategies that backfire. The moment when your clever schemes collapse, and you're left holding nothing but the consequences of your own deception. That was Katya, sitting in the ruins of her last con, holding nothing, understanding for the first time that she'd been stealing from herself all along. Let's be honest about what Katya did for a living. She stole things, art mostly, small pieces that could be moved easily, the kinds of items that wealthy collectors would pay for without asking too many questions about provenance. She worked for a broker, a man she knew only as Mr. Prague, though she was fairly certain he wasn't Czech, who found buyers and arranged logistics while Katya did the actual acquiring. She told herself it wasn't that bad. She only stole from people who could afford the loss. Rich assholes with more money than taste, who bought art as investment rather than love. She never stole from museums or public institutions, only private collections. Only people who were, in her estimation, hoarding beauty that should be shared. This was, of course, bullshit, but it was bullshit Katya had believed for 23 years. She'd gotten into theft young, 17, homeless in Berlin, desperate enough to steal a tourist's wallet and clever enough to get away with it. That first theft had felt like survival. By the 5th, it felt like skill. By the 50th, it felt like identity. She was good at this. Being good at something when you'd been mediocre or invisible your whole life was intoxicating. Add money, travel, the thrill of pulling off the impossible, it became addictive. She told herself she was living the dream, freedom, adventure, no boss, no schedule, no ordinary life. What she didn't admit, she had no real relationships, no home that felt like home, no one who knew her actual name or history. 23 years of freedom that was actually just 23 years of running. The 9 of Cups reversed. She'd drawn it 3 times in the past month, her one concession to superstition in an otherwise rationalized life. The 9 of Cups upright was about satisfaction, emotional fulfillment, getting what you wished for. But reversed was about false satisfaction, about getting everything you thought you wanted and discovering it's empty, about pleasure that doesn't nourish, success that leaves you hollow. That was Katya's life in a card. The job that broke everything was supposed to be routine. A wealthy Russian oligarch living in a villa outside Prague. Art collection that included a small Chagall, study for a larger work, valuable but not priceless. Mr. Prague had a buyer, Katya had a plan. Simple break-in, security system she'd bypassed a dozen times before, in and out in 20 minutes. She'd done the reconnaissance, knew the household schedule, knew exactly where the Chagall hung, library, second floor, wall safe behind it. What she didn't know was that the oligarch had recently hired new security. What she didn't know was that one of the security guards was former Mossad, paranoid and competent. What she didn't know was that her carefully planned escape route had been compromised 3 days earlier when construction closed the alley she'd planned to use. The Seven of Swords reversed. Your clever plan fails. Your strategy backfires. You think you're getting away with it, and then everything collapses. Katya got caught, not arrested. She managed to talk her way out before police arrived, used her Russian identity, and claimed she was the oligarch's mistress having a lover's quarrel. Was convincing enough that the security guards hesitated just long enough for her to run. But her face was on their cameras. Her fingerprints, because she'd gotten sloppy, overconfident, were on surfaces in the villa. And worse, the security guard recognized her technique, had seen something in her approach that suggested she'd done this before. Started making calls to colleagues in other cities. Within a week, Katya's face was circulating in private security networks. Her various identities were being connected. The careful separation she'd maintained between her different personas was collapsing. She couldn't work, couldn't take another job without risk of recognition, couldn't travel without potential for arrest at borders. 23 years of successful theft ended by one failed job. And the worst part, the part that kept her awake at night in her shitty sublet apartment in Zhizhkov, drinking cheap vodka and staring at the ceiling, was that she felt relieved. The relief was terrifying. Because what did it mean that she was relieved to have her career as a thief collapse? What did it mean that her first thought after the panic subsided was, thank God, finally, I can stop. She'd been running for 23 years, from her past, from connection, from anything that required her to be known, to be vulnerable, to be herself. And she'd convinced herself she loved it. The freedom, the excitement, the cleverness of it all. But the Nine of Cups reversed was showing her the truth. She was miserable. Had been miserable for years, maybe always. All that success, all that money, most of which she'd spent on maintaining cover identities and expensive temporary pleasures. All that freedom, it had given her nothing real. No relationships, no home, no sense of being known or loved or connected to anything larger than her own survival. She'd gotten exactly what she'd wished for, and it was empty. Katya sat in her apartment and tried to figure out what came next. She couldn't keep thieving. That door was closed. She couldn't go back to whatever her life had been before she'd started stealing, because that person was long gone, and anyway, that life had been shit. She was 41 years old with no legal work history, no references, no real identity, no skills that didn't involve deception. She was, to put it bluntly, fucked. It was strength that saved her, or maybe destroyed her. Hard to tell the difference. She'd drawn the card on a Thursday morning after another sleepless night. Strength showed a woman gently closing a lion's mouth, not through force, but through courage and compassion. The card was about inner strength, about taming your wild nature, not by suppressing it, but by integrating it, about having the courage to be vulnerable, to be gentle, to face what you've been running from. Katya looked at that card and thought, what am I afraid of? The answer came immediately: being known, being seen as she actually was, not one of her clever personas, not the confident thief who could talk her way into anywhere, but just herself. Small, scared, alone, desperate for connection, but convinced she didn't deserve it. She'd been running from that woman for 23 years, using theft and deception and constant movement to avoid ever having to sit still long enough to feel how lonely she was. Strength said, stop running, face the lion, be brave enough to be vulnerable. So Katya did something she hadn't done in over 2 decades. She went home. Home was Ostrava, an industrial city in the northeastern Czech Republic. The place Katya, whose real name was Kateřina Svobodová, had fled at 17 after her mother's boyfriend had made it clear that staying was no longer safe. She hadn't been back since, didn't know if her mother was still alive, still in the same flat, didn't know if she'd be recognized or remembered or wanted. But she went anyway, because strength said, face what you've been avoiding. Because the 7 of Swords reversed said, your clever escape plans are done. Because the 9 of Cups reversed said, false satisfaction has run its course. She found her mother's building, same gray Soviet-era block she remembered, slightly more decrepit. Climbed the stairs, no elevator, never had been. Stood outside the door of flat 412, knocked. Her mother answered. 58 now, but looking 70. Thin, worn, but with the same eyes Kateřina remembered. They stared at each other. Kateřino, her mother whispered. Ahoy, mommy, Kateřina said and burst into tears. Her mother, Jana, didn't ask questions at first, just pulled Kateřina inside, made tea, sat her at the same kitchen table where they'd eaten dinner 24 years ago. I thought you were dead, Jana said finally. No word for so long. I thought, her voice broke. I thought you died, and I just didn't know. I'm sorry, Kateřina said. I couldn't. I didn't know how to come back. After I left, after what happened with Miroslav. That bastard is long gone, Jana said sharply. I threw him out 6 months after you disappeared. Should have done it sooner, should have protected you better. It wasn't your fault. It was my fault, Jana said. I chose him over you. I didn't see what was happening, didn't believe you when you tried to tell me, and you ran, and I've been living with that for 24 years. They sat in silence, decades of guilt and regret filling the small kitchen. Where have you been? Jana asked finally. And Kateřina, because strength meant facing truth, because the 7 of Swords reversed meant deception had failed, told her everything. Berlin at 17, the first theft, the years of running, the different identities, the art theft, the oligarch's villa, the failed job, the relief she'd felt when it all collapsed. She expected judgment, expected her mother to be horrified or disgusted or ashamed. Instead, Jana laughed, sharp, bitter, sad. So we're both thieves, she said. Kateřina looked up, confused. I've been stealing from myself for 24 years, Jana explained. Stealing my own chance at forgiveness, at making amends, at having a relationship with my daughter. every day telling myself you were better off without me, that I'd failed too badly to deserve you back. That was theft, Katarzyna. That was me stealing from both of us. Mommy. The Seven of Swords reversed, Jaina said, and Katarzyna's eyes widened. You think I don't know tarot? I've been reading cards since you were small. You just never paid attention. She pulled out a worn deck from a kitchen drawer. When you left, I started reading every day, asking the cards where you were, if you were safe. The Seven of Swords kept appearing. I thought it meant you were in danger, that someone was deceiving you. But it was reversed. It meant your deceptions were failing, that you were deceiving yourself about something, and I was doing the same. She dealt 3 cards onto the table. 7 of Swords reversed, 9 of Cups reversed, Strength. These 3, Jana said, over and over, different arrangements, but always these 3. The theft that fails, the satisfaction that's empty, the courage to face your own wild nature. What does it mean? Katarzyna whispered. It means, Jana said, taking her hand, that we both have to stop stealing from ourselves. Stop taking the easy, empty thing instead of the hard, real thing. Stop running from the lion. Face it, tame it, not with violence, but with courage. I don't know how, Katarzyna said. Neither do I, Jana admitted, but maybe we figure it out together. Katarzyna stayed in Ostrava, not in her mother's flat. That was too small, too full of old ghosts, but in a cheap apartment nearby. Got a job, legal, boring, poorly paid, cleaning offices at night. Used a real work permit under her real name for the first time in 23 years. It was humiliating. She was 41, cleaning toilets, earning minimum wage, when 3 months ago she'd been pulling off sophisticated art thefts and earning more in one job than most people made in a year. But it was also real. She existed, Katarzyna Svobodova, with a registered address and tax identification, and a boss who knew her name. Not glamorous, not exciting, not clever, but not empty either. She saw her mother twice a week. They were awkward with each other. 24 years of absence don't heal overnight. But they were trying, learning each other again. Jana teaching Katarzyna to cook traditional Czech dishes. Katarzyna helping Jana figure out her smartphone. Small things, ordinary things. Things worth more than any Chagall. The 9 of Cups reversed was transforming, slowly, the empty satisfaction giving way to something more modest but real. She didn't have much, didn't have the thrill or the money or the excitement, but she had her mother, had her real name, had a life, however small, that was actually hers. 3 months after returning to Ostrava, Katarzyna received a letter. It was from Interpol, formal, official, terrifying. They knew about some of her thefts, had evidence, were building a case, but, and this was the unexpected part, they were offering a deal. Cooperate, provide information about Mr. Prague and his network, help them recover stolen art and prosecute the brokers and buyers. In exchange, reduced charges, possible immunity, a chance to make restitution rather than just face punishment. Katarzyna sat with the letter for a week. She could run again, disappear. She'd done it before, could probably do it again despite the security network complications. Or she could stay, face consequences, try to make amends. The 7 of Swords reversed said, Your clever escapes are done. Time to face what you've done. Strength said, have the courage to be vulnerable, to face truth without armor. She called the number on the letter. The cooperation took 2 years, 2 years of interviews, of providing information, of helping Interpol understand Mr. Prague's network, how he found buyers, moved art, laundered money, of facing the reality that she'd been part of something larger and uglier than she'd let herself acknowledge. She had to testify, had to face some of the people she'd stolen from, see their faces, understand that even rich assholes were still people who'd been violated. She had to return to places she'd worked, Berlin, Vienna, Budapest, not as clever thief, but as witness, cooperator, person trying to undo harm. It was excruciating, humiliating, necessary. Mr. Prague and 3 other brokers were arrested. Millions in stolen art were recovered and returned. Buyers were prosecuted. The network Katarzyna had been part of collapsed, and Katarzyna, in exchange for her cooperation, received suspended sentence. Community service, restitution payments she'd be making for the next decade, a criminal record, but freedom, real freedom. Not the fake freedom of constantly running, but the freedom of having faced truth and survived it. She stayed in Ostrava, got a better job, working at a small gallery, helping with restoration and cataloging. The owner knew her history, hired her anyway. You understand art, he said. Why you understood, it doesn't matter as much as the fact that you do. She attended court-ordered therapy, worked on the parts of herself that had needed to run, to steal, to never be known. Worked on believing she could be seen and still be safe. She rebuilt her relationship with her mother, slowly, with setbacks, but with growing trust. On the 5-year anniversary of her return to Ostrava, Jana gave her a gift. The tarot deck she'd been reading all those years Katarzyna was gone. These are yours now, Jana said. You need them more than I do. That night, Katarzyna did a reading, asked the cards, who am I now? She drew 3. 7 of Swords, upright this time. The clever strategy, the skill, the intelligence, but now in service of something real. She was still clever, still skilled, just using it for restoration rather than theft, for truth rather than deception. 9 of Cups, upright, true satisfaction, emotional fulfillment, the wish that actually nourishes. She had so little compared to her thief days. Small apartment, modest income, simple life. But it was real. It was enough. It was hers. Strength, still there, still necessary. The woman and the lion integrated. Her wild nature not suppressed but tamed through courage and compassion. The part of her that wanted to run, to steal, to deceive. It was still there, would always be there. But she had the strength now to face it without giving into it. She was 46 years old, had a criminal record, was paying restitution that would take a decade, had a job cleaning and cataloging art she'd once stolen, had a mother who knew her real name, had a life that was ordinary, modest, unglamorous, had stolen nothing worth keeping for 23 years, and now, finally, had something no one could steal. Herself, real, known, enough. The thief who stole nothing had finally found what she'd been looking for all along. It had been inside her the whole time. She just needed the courage, strength to stop running long enough to see it.